Hello. We are so excited to welcome Ananya Zutshi as our guest today. Ananya graduated from Duke prior to going to HBS, and since HBS, she started Guardian Bio, a biotech startup focused on next-gen cell therapy for cancer. She is truly an amazing woman, she was an amazing classmate to Alex and I, and an amazing friend. So we are so excited to get to talk to her today and hear about her journey from Duke to HBS and what she's been up to since then.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Just to echo what Julia said, so excited to have you here, honored to have you as our guest. And without further ado, let's just jump right in. Would love if you could start with just telling us a little bit about your background. Where are you from? Julia already mentioned you went to Duke, but what were you doing before business school?
I guess I can start from the very beginning. I was born in India, moved to the US when I was 7, very much a classic immigrant story. My dad got a job opportunity here. My parents wanted everything in the world for us, so they came over, leaving behind family and the entire lives that they'd built to come here. Grew up in Connecticut, which is very different than India. Ended up getting really intrigued by biomedical engineering. When I was in high school, I started really falling in love with all the science and applications in biomedical engineering. So when I was looking at colleges, that was my number one criteria, good school for biomedical engineering. And I ended up at Duke. Fun fact, I didn't know Duke had a basketball team when I applied. They're just a really phenomenal school for biomedical engineering. But I'm from Connecticut, which is UConn. So I got a lot of funny comments from my classmates when I ended up at Duke. Studied biomedical engineering there. It was a wild experience, a lot of ups, lots of downs, but I love this field so much. There's incredible science and tools and technology around us today, and we have just the ability to solve maybe not all of humanity's problems, but a lot of them, which is a pretty incredible time to be alive. I got to do research while I was at Duke, so got into a lab, got to work, got to publish some papers. And my original plan had been to go get a PhD. Actually, way back when I'd first gone into Duke, the original plan was go to med school. And then I interned at a hospital for a summer. And I was like, oh, nope, can't do that. Not going to do that.
I don't know. Dr. Dzuchi has a nice ring to it. I would let you operate on me. I think I trust you.
With a PhD?
Nope.
She's in med school, maybe med school.
I could not do med school or be a physician. I admire them deeply, couldn't do it. So I was like, all right, let me just help make tools for physicians to treat their patients. And then the plan was a PhD. And then that summer between junior and senior year of college, my dad ended up diagnosed with cancer. So there was this idea of like, all right, I want to be able to have a slightly more stable life post-graduation to be able to, visit my dad more, have more money, have more vacation, et cetera, be geographically closer. And at the same time, I also was like, I don't know if I'm ready to commit 4 to 7 years of my life on something just yet. So I went into industry, spent a couple of years on the manufacturing and development side of pharma biotech. I learned a lot of really important things about how hard it is to scale and commercialize after an incredible technology has been discovered. Really important learnings. Had roles across operations, engineering, BD, project management. And along that time, again, my original plan was 2 years in industry, go back to PhD. And then when it was time to consider going back, I just did a lot of soul searching and was like, I think, and talking to people I knew in PhD programs, I realized that I did not need to be the person calling the scientific shots. I just want to be on the team, help make things happen. I didn't need to be the person calling the shots. And to do that, I didn't need the PhD. So I stayed in industry, but I did start to realize that I missed being closer to the science. The manufacturing development side is kind of a step removed from really scientific innovation and patient impact in some ways. And I just wanted to be, when I was project manager, I wanted to be doing what my clients were doing. And my way of kind of doing that mini pivot within the industry was going back to grad school. Although I did the MS MBA, MS in Engineering MBA, and we can talk about that because I don't think I would have done just the MBA. It was within the MS MBA that I started to really appreciate entrepreneurship. That had never been on my life bingo card. It had not been on my radar at all. And now I was surrounded by people who were not just thinking about it, but had done it, were going to do it. And I realized, well, if I really love being close to science and wanting to fill this kind of business technical gap, the earliest stages are where that can have some of the biggest impact. became a Blavatnik Fellow after HBS, which we could talk about, and then ended up founding the company coming out of that fellowship.
Amazing. What I love to hear about, especially your journey pre-MBA, is like the amount of introspection and the number of times you were comfortable changing your mind, right? Like you were learning, you were observing, you weren't just thinking about what am I doing, but you were watching the people around you, and you were able to say, I actually want to be closer to that part of it. And you were able to make these what might seem like micro adjustments, but they were actually kind of bigger and had bigger implications. I'm curious, like, when did the thought of an MBA first even come into your mind? Like, when was the first time you heard of an MBA program? And I'm also curious because it sounds like your family had a really big impact in your world. Like, what did they think when you brought up the idea of an MBA?
So the first thing I think is an important question, because I didn't really know people who'd gone to an MBA program. Most of my friends, maybe all of my friends at the time from undergrad, had either gone into industry in various ways or PhDs or MD programs, but I did not really know anyone who'd done an MBA program until one of the people at work that was in this leadership development program I was at as a part of at work, he went to MIT's MS MBA program. And when I heard that, I knew I needed to kind of go to grad school in some capacity to kind of level up in my career as Jules, especially, you know, in healthcare and biotech, most people, the vast majority of people have advanced degrees. So I knew I needed to do something and I just didn't quite know what was right for me. And then when he kind of talked to me about this MS MBA, I'm like, that sounds perfect because I can deepen my technical chops, not lose this really big part of my identity as an engineer while still building my skill sets on the kind of business side of drug development and discovery, which when I was a project manager, I was starting to really appreciate how important that business managerial aspect of things were. And the more I talked to him, the more I was like, that's something I want to pursue.
I think you bring up a really good point. Like, not every industry does require higher degrees. And I think the fact that you looked around and you noticed, okay, everyone has some type of higher degree. There's not like one degree that is right. I think that's an important thing to call out. Like for you, you did feel like it was necessary to progress in that industry. And it's just a matter of finding the right fit. And curious, did you apply both to LGO and the HBS dual degree? How many dual degrees are there that are kind of like what you were looking for?
I think today there are more. So people should definitely go do fresh Googles and not just take my word for it. But so I applied twice. The first time I applied only to LGO, only to MIT. I don't think I'd done a ton of background research. I'm engineering is my background. MIT is like the holy grail for engineers. There's something about that I just love the idea of. I do remember looking up some different programs. I believe Cornell has an MS MBA. That was also a 2-year program. Stanford had one, but I believe theirs was just for electrical engineering, and it was a 3-year program, which I didn't like as much. But there weren't many. Like out of the dual degrees out there in the MBA, there were not a lot of MS MBAs. LGO was the first one I found. That first year, I only applied to LGO, got an interview, bombed the interview. And we can talk about that, but it's terrible in the interview. They asked me why I wanted an MBA and I didn't have an answer. So I had not done a lot of introspection. I walked out being like, my God. And then the second year, I applied to LGO again. This time, I think round 1, I didn't even get an interview. And originally that was going to be it. And then my mom, and I'm going to give my dad's a big part of the reason I'm an engineer, but my mom is probably the biggest reason I'm comfortable taking risk in things. She had been the one that was like, what about Harvard's? And that would have been the last year that my GRE scores were good. Otherwise, I would have had to retake a test. So I ended up applying to MSMBA at HBS very last minute and somehow got in. And it changed the trajectory of my life.
And we were so glad that you did because we might not have mentioned it, but we were all, Alex and I were in Ananya's section. And so we got to benefit from her insight, especially in all of the biotech cases, but also her friendship and everything else. So we're really glad that you made that last minute decision. When you look back, and I'm going to bookmark, we're going to talk about the interview because I'm so curious, like what exactly you said about why an MBA. And I think it's like such a good call out that if you don't have a good answer for it, you might not be ready to apply. When you look back on your application, clearly, something stood out in there. If you're thinking about sort of your resume, your essays, your recommendations, what part of your application do you feel like was the strongest and how did you get it to be that strong?
This is an interesting question. And the honest answer is I'm not totally sure. I was trying to look up what my GRE scores were to see. I mean, I know I was happy enough with it that I took it once and I was like, this is good enough for whatever I think I want to do. But I couldn't find them because it's been over 5 years. So they've been purged from the system. So I will assume they were strong, but I don't think they were necessarily shoe-in type of strong. I consider myself a pretty good writer, and I feel like I probably had some pretty strong essays. And then I had some really great recommenders. My current manager and a past manager that I had great relationships with, who'd seen me through a lot of really important moments in my early career that they could, I'm sure, talk about and pull on. I'm sure that was a big part of it as well. But maybe it was the focus in some ways. And I totally appreciate that for a lot of people, they don't necessarily get into an MBA knowing exactly what they want to do after, or even exactly what industry they want to be in. And in that way, I think an MBA is one of the most interesting degrees, because I want to say every other advanced degree, people are kind of coming in from similar fields and going out to do very similar things. And an MBA is the only one where you're just a hodgepodge of people that come from different backgrounds and different levels and different skill sets and will go out in that same way. But I knew I wanted to do something in pharma biotech in the earlier stages. That had been my focus for a very, very long time. And in my application, I really was like, this is what I want to do. This is how I've set myself up for it. This is why I think this will help me set up for it. And this is what I want to do after to accomplish my longer term goals. So maybe it was the focus and the passion behind that.
I'm sure it read across very genuine. You had personal reasons for being in it, but you've also been passionate about it for years. You have a track record showing that you're going after this dream that you have. And HBS especially is looking for the potential of, does Ananya have the potential to be a leader in this space? Also loved the point you made about, I don't think I ever thought about the MBA being different in that respect of diversity of backgrounds, which also provides diversity of conversation in the classroom. And it's just such a fun aspect of it. And just getting to meet people from all over the world and who have been doing so many different things. It was my favorite part of the business school experience. It sounds like you did a great job with the HBS essay and total application to get that interview. Can we circle back first, though, because out of great failure can come great success. So can we circle back to the MIT LGO interview? Thinking back, what should you have done differently going into that one?
To kind of prepare for this, I'd gone back and listened to some of your old podcasts. And one thing that stood out to me, I'd listened to Matt and Jeff's. And one thing that stood out to me was like, oh gosh, I feel like those are like best practices in how to approach this. And my story is kind of just like lessons learned in retrospect, because both of them spent a lot of time thinking about why they want to do this, a lot of introspection, which is so important. And I just hadn't really done that. I just knew I wanted to kind of move to the next stage in my career. And it felt like this degree might be the way to do it. But coming from a technical background, I also mentioned I wouldn't have done just the MBA. It was the MS MBA that appealed to me. In a lot of ways, going to business school felt like selling out my technical background. And maybe that's part of the reason why initially I didn't do that much introspection, because I didn't fully understand why this degree was important. And when they asked you that question, that probably came across pretty damn clearly. And I was just kind of stumbling over my words, trying to come up with something that probably sounded buzzwordy and frankly, probably pretty inauthentic. You guys hit on that word a second ago. And I walked out just knowing, I was like, I didn't get that. That was awful. I didn't get it. And then I spent the next year, and it was another year when I was a project manager, which again, that role also really helped me appreciate how important understanding management and leadership and finance and marketing and how all of these different things come together, how important that is and how unique that those opportunities can be. So when I applied the second time, I had a much better understanding of why I wanted both the MS MBA, but really the MBA. And I wish I'd done that introspection the first time around.
You bring up a couple of interesting points. There are people who reapply, and we have a number of classmates. Now, you only happen to apply to the HBS program once, but there are people who take a first stab and then have to really pause and think about it. And then in that rejection, it's a moment to say, like, do I really want this? And if I do really want it, then I'm going to refocus. I'm curious how you went in the next cycle after that. It sounds like, you clearly applied again to the MIT program and you applied to HBS with your mom's nudging. But like, how did you think about your application differently that next year? What had you learned and what did you do differently to prepare?
It was a lot more thought about what I wanted to do with my life and what that journey to get to that level could look like, or that place could look like. And I'll be frank, in some ways, I do think some of the things I want to achieve in my career I could do without the MSMBA, but it was just a way to get there a lot faster. That's the biggest credit I will give it. The fact that I founded a biotech company, there's no way anyone would have let me do this without the at least MBA from HBS. So it was really understanding, where do I want to go? Why do I want to go there? And what type of skill sets do I need to develop to help me get there? And what are some of the most efficient ways to do it? And also really realizing that I did want to move more into the deeper, pure biotech versus contract side of the industry, and recognizing that the grad school MSMBA opportunity would let me do a little bit of that pivot easier than trying to just apply for jobs myself.
When did you get the entrepreneurial bug? Like, was that very clear in your application? I am going to start my own biotech company. Or was it kind of more once you got to school, you're like, oh, I could actually do this?
It was the second half of RC year when I really started, first year of business school, that I really started thinking about it. So in my application, I did not talk about entrepreneurship at all. I think I said my ambition is to be like a program or project manager at a small to mid-sized biotech pharma company and work my way up to like some sort of VP, director of engineering or operations role. I didn't even really see myself in, again, kind of businessy, quote unquote, classic businessy roles. I really did want to take more of the operational route. It was coming to, and here I will give HBS a huge amount of credit, because there's a lot of entrepreneurial energy around HBS and around Boston, Cambridge. And I remember I didn't know anything about it. Like in my first week, so the MSMBA starts early. We do a class before everyone else gets there, and we do one in the winter. It's helped us keep the program to 2 years instead of 3 with the dual degree. And I remember talking to one of the guys in my program, and I was like, what is VC? What is PE? Like, what do these letters stand for? Now I use those words every day, but I knew nothing. And it was really being around, and I should also add, as a slight plug for the MS Engineering MBA at HBS, it is very entrepreneurial. The focus is entrepreneurship. The classes, the courses are really meant to help foster an entrepreneurial spirit and an entrepreneurial future. So being around that it really let me jump into the deep end of like, okay, this is what this means. This is what it could look like. And then being in Boston, Cambridge, there was a program that's now huge and global. It's now a nonprofit called Nucleate. But back then, it was, I think, in its second year of conception. It was just between MIT and Harvard. It's called Activate at the time. And it was about kind of life science entrepreneurship, batching up MBAs and PhDs or postdocs, working on research and seeing if you could commercialize it. And I did that program second half of the first year, and I really liked it. We ended up winning the pitch competition, and I was like, I think this is something I want to explore. And I spent that summer between first and second year. I said no to some internship offers from kind of classic pharma to be like, I want to work on this, explore this entrepreneurship thing, and decided that I don't know if I'm going to be good at it. I don't even know if I'm going to like it when I'm really in it full time, but I want to try. That's where I think I can really help make an impact, lay down a good foundation for tech and get it to people who need it that much faster and that much more efficiently. And then I structured my entire second year to be kind of around when I graduate, I'm going to do a biotech startup.
That's amazing. I give you a lot of credit in how you're describing it, because I feel like you came in with the right amount of balance, which is you had an idea of what you wanted to work on, right? You had an idea of the industry and you had a certain set of focus, but then you were open-minded, open in the environment to what was being said. You were willing to ask questions that I know there are some people who, if they heard VC and PE, would have been too shy to like ask what are those things, or would have been too shy or concerned about just jumping in and trying the entrepreneurial landscape because you hadn't before. So I feel like I think Ananya stands out as someone who came in and was willing to like ask the question, to try the thing that she hadn't done before when she was in school. And there's some people who go in and they're like, well, I've never done this. Like, I don't know. And they don't take full advantage. I would describe how I saw your experience is like you took full advantage of all of the entrepreneurial opportunities offered to you by the school. I'm wondering, looking back on your business school experience, like, were there any opportunities that you didn't take that you wish you could have, or like things that you wish you could go back and do over?
I mean, as you guys know, we had COVID hit. So our second year there's things intertwined with that. One thing I wish I'd been more social our first year. I feel like I was and maybe again, I come from a slightly more technical background. When I think about grad school, it's about the studying. It's not necessarily about the kind of social component. And a lot of my learning was like, especially in MBAs, as much about getting to really develop relationships with the people around you as it is about the skill sets that you're learning. I wish I'd done more of that my first year because I make a lot of financial models in my role, but I wish I didn't need to spend as long trying to figure out how to do that first year. I would have figured it out eventually.
You still figured out how to be plenty social and make friends. We forced you.
So maybe I wish you'd had to force me less, or that, yeah. But pure opportunity wise, I don't think so. I did push pretty hard of the things that were entrepreneurship related at HBS. I did take advantage of quite a few of them.
I feel like that's a sign of an MBA program well done, that you like walked away and you're like, oh, I'm like, there's nothing that I left on the table as far as what they had to offer, like what I could get out of it. Like that's a sign that you really used your time like incredibly effectively.
Just for people who aren't as aware, you mentioned with the MSMBA, you start earlier, but what does it actually look like? Because you are getting 2 master's degrees in 2 years. How is it different? And what's the same as a typical HBS MBA? And, logistically, what's actually going on? What is the MSMBA?
Yes. And I will disclaimer, this might be different at different schools. At Harvard, the way it's done is that the first year you are fully entrenched in HBS. I think everyone recognizes that the HBS first year experience is so unique and so special. They don't want to take you away from that at all. We did have a class that was kind of overarching, but we would do that in like the evenings type of things. You start early, you take a class early. It's a very intense crash course in some, like with the engineering school. You do your entire first year normally with HBS with that kind of one class overarching, a lot of speakers, but that's kind of, again, it's no time, doesn't mess with HBS time. The real difference comes in the second year. And I should mention in the winters, during the winter break between first and second semester, you do have a class that you have to be into, right? So I couldn't go take any fun tracks because I had to be on the HBS or the engineering school campus taking a class at those times too.
So you were taking a class when people were at Yacht Week is what you're saying.
Yes, it was very sad. None of us could go to Yacht Week, but it's okay. We had so much fun working on differential equations. But it did help our class become very close, and you had kind of friends ready when everyone else flocked onto campus. But the real difference comes in the second year. And essentially the difference there is that we take less HBS classes and we have to take a certain number of engineering credits. It's the Graduate School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, C's, within the Graduate School of Arts and Applied Sciences. I don't know. Sorry, Harvard. But we have to take classes within kind of the Harvard Engineering School for the second year. So that's a little bit of a bummer because there's a ton of incredible class at HBS, and by virtue, you have to kind of roll back. In that sense, I think I got a little lucky because our second year was COVID-y and HBS was hybrid, but the engineering school was fully virtual. And for me, that meant I could kind of take more advantage of stuff at HBS because I didn't have to factor in, if nothing else, a 30-minute walk between campuses, right? I could take classes that were more back to back. I could try to convince people to let me audit a class because it might have overlapped by a couple of minutes. And at HBS, you are not allowed to be late to classes. So yes, the biggest difference is in really the second year. Try to keep it. They don't want to mess with the HBS experience.
Can I ask, I'm sure you had favorite classes in both of your programs. How did a quintessential HBS class differ from your engineering classes?
Maybe the example I'll give, and again, as a disclaimer, it was really the second year. So the engineering school was virtual. But one story that still makes me laugh is one of the classes I'd taken, everyone was off camera except me and the professor.
Whoa, that would be not allowed at HBS.
If you turned your camera off for 3 minutes at HBS, they were messaging you being like, what happened? Come back online. But it wasn't enforced in the engineering school. And I felt so bad for the professor to be lecturing to a bunch of black boxes that I was like, I'll keep my camera on. So big difference. Or the grading, right? Like in HBS, in most classes, something like 50% of your grade is participation, raising your hand, speaking, contributing to the conversation, responding to others. Not so, shockingly, in the engineering classes. They are 95% actual exams and problem sets and labs and maybe 5% participation.
Which classes did you like better?
I love the case method. I love being able to learn from all of the incredible, brilliant people around me alongside our incredible, brilliant professors. Don't get me wrong. I love science. You guys know I love science so much. Like the material in the engineering classes I find fascinating, but format, yeah, HBS by a mile.
I know we had some pretty interesting biotech or pharma related classes. I have one memory in particular of a gentleman who was in our section who worked for Uber who tried to convince us we should do surge pricing for pharmaceuticals like they do with Uber. Do you have any memories of any classes or any case method experiences that stand out to you as particularly formative or impactful?
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily going to shine a good light on MBAs.
That's okay. Well, neither did the surge pricing of pharmaceuticals.
That's fair. I still remember that moment. That was wild. Our marketing professor was so taken aback. But I did have one of those moments. And I feel like one of the things we learn in an MBA is how to communicate well, how to communicate effectively, eloquently, persuasively, et cetera, et cetera. And we were doing, I don't even remember what case it was. It was a kind of pharma biotech case, but someone in our section said something and it was just so categorically wrong. Oh, it was about research. It was about government should be subsidizing more research. And it was just so categorically wrong in so many different ways, but they said it really eloquently and really persuasively. And I remember looking around the room and seeing lots of people nodding and being like, yeah, that's a great point. And in that moment, I was like, this can be a really dangerous skill set. And then I raised my hand and I was like, actually, this is how government funding for research works. And this is how the pipeline goes and why you need to transition eventually to private capital and all of these things. You don't want government spending too much money necessarily on an extremely risky business at its core. And of course, there's ways it can be fixed, but it was just trying to provide more nuance from actually understanding the industry. And one of the takeaways I have from that is just when I hear someone say something that might be really persuasive, I question it much more than I would have probably before. I really want to understand who they are, dig in deeper, test their assumptions, and not just buy in because it sounds good. Because I learned how easy it can be to be fooled by something that sounds good.
I feel like what you're saying, like, I mean, it sort of could speak ill of the MBA, but on the other hand, it's if those are going to be the people, to me, it's all the more important that you learn how to have those skills yourself if you have the depth, expertise, and knowledge too, because you know you're going to have to come against the banker or the consultant who can put together a slide and be really persuasive. But if you're going to, I think all of us are pretty deep in our own subject matter knowledge to be able to have the skill to then be persuasive with that. It's the only way that you're going to get your point across when you're in a room full of other MBA trained people. So I think it speaks to why in the corporate world it's so important to both question, as you said, but then build your own skill set so you can go toe to toe with people who might be BSing a little bit.
Yes. And it's a skill that good leaders and managers should learn eventually, but being able to do it in MBA when it's a person, right? It's a section mate. I know them. I like them. I hang out with them. I feel very comfortable pushing back on them and being like, hey, you're wrong. And being able to kind of do those reps and build that muscle, just like you said, in a safer environment. And even beyond, like there's going to be people around us who not just MBAs, but might have the PhDs, the MDs, the JDs, all these advanced degrees. But again, learning that advanced degree doesn't mean they're right. Just because they can say something and it doesn't mean they're right. It's okay to still push and seek to understand and make people explain themselves a little bit more.
I did want to bring up something, the way that you're talking about, like not being afraid to speak up and push back. For the listeners' knowledge, Ananya was very involved with women-specific programming at HBS, and one of my favorite sayings of hers was basically, stop saying you're sorry. Could there be another word that you could say instead of sorry, or was sorry necessary? And encouraging us to not say sorry or downplay what we're saying.
I am in an industry and I'm in a role where everyone around me has these MDs, has these PhDs, PharmDs, or some combination of them all. And I feel really comfortable pushing back and asking questions and digging in. And I don't know if I would have had that without the MBA.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I also, you described early on about is getting an MBA selling out. I'm curious now that you're in the industry, you have your MS MBA, you obviously have an engineering background from your undergrad. How do you feel it's perceived in your industry, your background?
I will say, because I don't have the deeper technical degree, to have real credibility, everyone I surround myself with does have one of those degrees. My co-founder has a PhD in immunology and spent 4 years doing a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania. Our co-founder has an MD PhD. If you look at my team slide, everyone on it has an MD or a PhD or both. So I will say you can't just not have it around you in our industry. But that being said, I have been pleasantly surprised. And this is honestly something I was really nervous about and had a lot of imposter syndrome about in the early days of the startup, I was really nervous that I wouldn't be able to get a lot of respect because I don't have those degrees. It turns out, as long as you are passionate and curious and like want to learn, and that is one of the biggest things I think MBAs bring to the table, is that willingness to learn, the communication, the curiosity, the wanting to help, all improve efficiencies and all those things. If you bring that and are just excited to talk to people and learn about what they're doing and figure out how you can help them, it doesn't matter to them that I don't have the more advanced degrees. They treat me like a peer. They let me ask those questions. It has been, it's been great. It's funny though, I will say maybe a potential confounding variable is that I don't, like in my email signatures and things like that, I don't have any letters. And frankly, people often assume I just have the PhD.
If you have an MBA, do not put that in your tagline. Like, just as a rule, I work on the other side of healthcare, and it's almost like an eye roll when you see MBA in the tagline.
I agree. I do not put in any tagline. I don't lead with it. If I'm doing an intro, of course I will mention it, but it is not something I lead with. It is just the skill sets that I've been remarkable and the network.
I think you've touched on a lot of good points about how you already see the MBA being helpful. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about how the MBA degree has really helped specifically in terms of getting your startup off the ground?
Yeah, I think there's two big aspects of this. One is the network, and the second is the kind of understanding of how interpersonal dynamics are just critical and overarching everything. So I'll start with the network because that's a little bit easier. HBS has an unreal network. Pretty much every, or at least the vast majority of companies I look at that maybe I want to speak to someone, or firms I look at where I might want to speak to someone in there is going to have gone to HBS and I can reach out to them. So the network has been amazing. Most of the people we have around us that are really invested in us and what we're doing, most of them I got through some sort of HBS contact or some sort of HBS resource. And like I said, being a first-time founder in a deeply technical industry without necessarily a long track record in this industry, having those people around you, something someone said very early to me in the startup journey was you have to borrow the credibility of the people around you kind of until you build your own credibility. And being able to have such unreal individuals to borrow credibility from has been huge. The Dude Network has also helped in this, but HBS is the primary one I tend to go to. And the second is this idea of interpersonal dynamics. And I actually will give an example because I was very aware of it earlier this week. I was at this biotech leadership summit and we were doing little caselets, my favorite. We were doing little caselets with CEOs, serial CEOs in the biotech world. And the little caselet that I was a part of, the CEO was talking about a situation in which the technical team, the two leaders were disagreeing on something and it was gating them from having a meeting with the FDA. And they were kind of talking about how they were disagreeing on basically a certain set of experiments to run. And it had gone so far that they were even kind of questioning each other's competency, kind of sniping at each other. And in this room where everyone around me had a technical background, again, a lot of PhDs in that room, they were all throwing out suggestions about, have they tried laying down their arguments in really rational ways? Have they tried this? Have they tried that? Really great frameworks, rational frameworks would be extremely helpful in lots of different team settings. But I was sitting there and then I finally said, look, the thing that worries me the most in this entire situation is the fact that they're sniping at each other. The fact that my team has seemed to lose respect for each other. It's like all of these rational things do not matter because it's become an emotional situation. And that needs to be dealt with first before anything else can happen. And that ended up being the answer. The CEO had to deal with the interpersonal dynamics before the team could set up for kind of a rational conclusion. And I remember in that moment thinking oh, that's the MBA training. That's the MBA training helping me realize, we have this joke at HBS, right? Everything turns into lead. And again, this is another lesson that I think any good leader and any good manager will learn in their career. But I got to shortcut that learning. I didn't have to learn it from my own mistakes. I got to learn it from the learnings of others. And I can just kind of skip to the part where I get to apply it. My co-founder too, one of the reasons he said he wanted to work with me was because when we were kind of going through a trial period, figuring out if we wanted to found together, one aspect of that trial period was technical. We were working together on little projects. But the other aspect was us having a lot of hard conversations around what does it mean to found together? How does this line up against your other life priorities? And all that kind of squishy, soft stuff that my old engineering life would have hated and not understood why it's useful. That squishy stuff that MBA is really about. That's the stuff that really convinced him to be like, all right, this is someone I want to do this with.
Such a good call out. And for anyone listening who potentially is going to go to HBS, you got to take Founder's Journey, because it's all about like the emotional side of entrepreneurship, if you ever think you will do entrepreneurship.
Both great points. I am curious, as we come to a close and some of our questions here, you mentioned networking. How do you tap into the HBS network, or how do you stay in touch with the HBS community more generally?
I'm lucky because I'm in the Boston, Cambridge area, so I can go back to events or go to events pretty easily. And especially within the healthcare world and the life science world, we have WhatsApp groups, we have these chats, we have these meetups. I have professors that I'm still close with that are in those silos at HBS. I help with some cases for the entrepreneurship and life sciences. We were actually featured in one a couple of weeks ago, which was really, really cool. If I go to any major conferences, I always try to hit up the HBS events, Bio, JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. HBS will always have something at those things, and I make it a priority to hit those up. And then beyond that, like I said, it is when there's something I'm trying to deal with and I do not necessarily have someone that I can go to already, the HBS network is the first thing I look at. Like if I see someone at a company that I want to talk to that went to HBS, I will go through like the alumni portal and be like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I see that you're doing this. Can I get 15 minutes of your time to ask for advice? I really use that portal and those networks as much as I can.
That's awesome. That's something I think we all wish we did more. You again are a good example of like really using the resources at your fingertips.
I mean, when you're an entrepreneur, there's not a ton of resources. So the ones that you have to use as thoroughly as possible.
You sound like a very resourceful entrepreneur. So thinking back on the application or the actual business school experience, what advice do you have for people who are thinking about going down this route?
The biggest one would be to do things with a much better pacing than I did. I applied very quickly. I think the HBS application I put together in 2 weeks. It was intense, and for recommenders, I mean they'd written ones for LGO, so they could probably work from that as a template, but it was intense, and I didn't have time to do the introspection. I didn't have time to really do things as properly as it should be done. As a result, I had my slight existential crisis while in MBA rather than before that, and I wish I'd taken more time to do that self-reflection, better understand what are all the options out there, what do they mean, how are they different. All the business schools are quite different in a lot of ways, right? I wish I'd done more of that, and I would recommend people who are thinking about doing this to do more of that. And it doesn't need to be perfect, but even if it's finding people that you admire, that you'd want to be like, do that introspection, know the general direction where you want to go. Because otherwise, an MBA, I remember in that first week, so many people told us it's like drinking from a fire hose. I was so sick of hearing that phrase. And then everyone else showed up on campus, the actual MBA started, and I was like, yeah, yes, 100% what it is. And I think if you don't have some amount of focus in who you are and what you want to do, it's very easy to start getting lost in that. And again, because I had this guiding light of pharma, biotech, cancer, it was easier for me to muddle through it. But maybe it would have been a little different if I thought about entrepreneurship as a life option before starting HBS too.
Well, words of wisdom from Ananya. And it's so nice to get to hear you reflect on your experience, because we walked it beside you. And it just makes me appreciate sort of your passion for what you're doing, your focus, your intelligence, even more getting to hear you play it back. We saw it at the time, but it's such a privilege to get you here, to hear you talk about your journey looking back. And there are classmates that you look at and you're like, I'm going to watch that one. And that's not the only reason we keep in touch with you, believe me. Ananya is also incredibly fun, and we could share many embarrassing stories from adventures in Vegas and Miami and et cetera. But you're someone we're so excited to see what you go do in the world. And it's awesome to get to sort of capture this moment where you're on the precipice of doing something amazing. And here are all the steps that you took to get there. So we're incredibly appreciative.
That was such a great conversation. It really warmed my heart. It always helps when you really know the person. And I think there's just so many good nuggets as we kind of dive into a little recap of what we think are some really great takeaways for people looking to apply.
Agreed. Just so many good pieces of wisdom and insight. So I'm excited to dig in and distill. So maybe we can start. I wanted to share from the top what I heard, what I think makes Ananya such an interesting and compelling applicant for an MBA program. So if you heard some commonality in her background, you might think, hey, that could be me. And the things that I heard that I think would make her such an interesting MBA candidate and why she got into great schools. One, she came from a great undergrad. That is always going to help. Coming from Duke or from an Ivy or from one of these top undergrads is never going to hurt. But two, coming in with an engineering background, I think engineers are technically considered non-traditional applicants, but MBA programs love an engineer. They know they can do the math, they know they can work really hard, and they know that they can break down complex problems. So for me, those two things I think stood out. Plus, and I know you're going to talk about this a little bit more, but I also think from such a young age, having a clear point of view of where she wanted to make impact, it obviously evolved with her family history and everything, but she had a clean narrative thread of here's where I came from, here's what I learned, and here's what I want to go do. So for me, that combination and having that non-traditional but highly sought after background makes her a stellar candidate.
Could not agree more. I think it's also interesting. She could have applied to a lot of different degrees, and there kind of leads me into the, how she approached the application process. She did so much soul searching to really make sure, okay, I want the MBA because I don't care as much about having to make the final call on the scientific decisions of a company, but I want to be part of the team. I want to be part of scaling this really great thing that can help save lives. And so I think all the soul searching about, okay, yep, MBA sounds right to me. Even just being influenced by the people that she worked with. She knew the person who did the MSMBA at MIT. I would say she knew what she wanted to do, which makes her a very strong applicant, but she was flexible about the path to get there. And then I think what's also interesting is, as you mentioned, she is a really good candidate, but she didn't get in the first time, which just goes to show you can be a really strong candidate, but if you don't package yourself well, you're going to get dinged, which is exactly what happened to her. She didn't, it was a little bit more last minute, whereas when she got the rejection, she knew she wasn't done, which also just goes to show, like, there's nothing wrong with applying a second time. And in most cases, it's looked upon favorably as long as your application is much more different than the last time, or like they can tell that you put in the work to really improve it. So I think all the extra work that she went into the second time, she even researched more about programs that would be a better fit for her. Like HBS wasn't even on her radar. And then she realized that was actually perfect. And so it just goes to show, like, put in the time to make sure you're doing something that feels right to you. Do the research, start, earlier in the process, talk to people as you can that have gone through this process, and you're going to show up so much better that second time. And, also just don't, rejection isn't a no forever. So don't be afraid to go back at it the second time.
So well put. Yeah. No is not no forever. No is no, not right now. Go take another stab at it. And we have many friends and colleagues who applied multiple times. And so, yeah, I love that example from Ananya, that she came back around, did that soul searching. It's such a good point. And I think you mentioned one of the things that made her application successful is probably also a muscle she strengthened. And I think when I heard her talk about why the MBA from HBS was so potent was the expansion of her network. I mean, she came in with those inherent skills. We heard it when she was applying. She came in with the knowledge of, hey, I think I want to, I know this person who had an interesting path, who did the MBA, MSMBA program. Let me investigate if that's right for me. So she had the instincts to begin with, but then to be able to take that instinct and to apply it to the massive network and potential that she had both during school, but then now that she has been a founder and working on her startup outside of it, it took something that was inherent to her and gave her the world, basically. She could reach it through networking. So I think one of the things that I heard as like a main takeaway or main value of the MBA program was the network and the the other thing she mentioned relative to the decisions of other kinds of programs was the heterogeneous nature of the MBA program. She could have gone to a very science, very biotech focused kind of grad school program, and she would have met a lot of people who were very similar, versus at the MBA program, she gained through her network, she gained both the language around investing in finance and VC, but she also gained that network of peers. And so I think to me, that was something that I heard her, she had the core skill to begin with, but then she took the best advantage of it while there.
So true. And I think the value of the MBA is it opens your eyes to what is possible, because you wouldn't have necessarily crossed paths with these people in other industries from other schools otherwise. And so, yeah, it opens your mind to what's possible. It also, frankly, opens doors. Like she said, I wasn't going to be able to get money if I didn't have that HBS stamp alongside like a technical co-founder. So I think she's a great example of really maximizing the use that you get out of all the resources of HBS while on campus, but also afterwards too, and tapping into that network again and again, and making sure she's going to those HBS specific events at these big conferences. She really is taking advantage of it all. And I would say she definitely is doing that more than the average graduate, is my guess.
One of the other takeaways I heard her speak about, which I think we can't emphasize enough, is the benefit she got in terms of speaking and feeling really confident going into rooms, where she is a founder, where she might not have those scientific credentials, but she could speak with a ton of confidence and authority and bring that energy, but in the same wavelength, using that same knowledge that, hey, I can go in and do this and speak with a lot of conviction, and then applying a really critical lens to others when they do that, and making sure there's substance underneath the style. And so I thought that was a really interesting nuance, not only to say I brought and learned confidence, but I've also learned how to sniff out and be more discerning about when people are bringing that confidence, to make sure there's something underneath it, which I loved that point.
And frankly, you're not going to get that in non-case method type classes, like her saying that, 95% of the grade in an engineering class is going to be how you do on the exams and problem sets, etc. But at the MBA, it's 50% of that participation, or I should say that's specific to the HBS case method. But that's where you get that practice. That's where you build that muscle. And if you want to be an entrepreneur, that can be super powerful, because you're going to get a lot of pushback from VCs that you're trying to invest in your product. And so the more confidence you have being able to convince someone, that's a really awesome skill set that you're not going to get in all types of degrees.
Absolutely. Well, we love talking to Ananya. I think you can hear there's value to be gleaned, whether you're getting ready to apply, you are in the midst of applying, or you are in the MBA program right now, and how you can take advantage. So once again, a big thank you to Ananya.